All right, so welcome everyone to the Static Site Editor Product and Design weekly call. This is August 17th, and we were just discussing the upcoming Static Site Editor group conversation, which is tomorrow, the 18th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And related to that, the only other thing I wanted to call out was that we made an announcement today that the Static Site Editor is available on the entire handbook, on all pages of the handbook, which is very exciting, but a little less dramatic of a reveal because it actually had been like that most of last week too. We just made the announcement today. So now everybody knows about it. We've had a few people respond and show their excitement and enthusiasm. That's great. And I guess the other part of that announcement worth calling out on the recording was we're nearing our goal for handbook pipeline duration. Average duration of the pipeline times has been a struggle for GitLab in general. It was peaking at over 30 minutes, sometimes hitting 40 minutes. It is now just about 11 minutes. And so the hard work that many of us, not just in the Static Site Editor group, have been doing to improve it, but I will say mostly Chad and Lauren have been working hard on getting that down, and their hard work is paying off. Our goal was 10 minutes. We're almost there, and then we'll probably have to have a discussion about how we can get it under 10 minutes, down to like maybe 5 or something like that. But that's very exciting because it's when it's a 30-minute build, it's very disruptive to collaboration. As far as, unless there's anything else, I can move on to the regular agenda.
Cool, I'm good.
Yeah, cool. All right, I just had 2 things. The first was just an update on the category maturity scorecard. I saw the note in there about where we should be sourcing from and how many groups. So it looks like we should probably aim to identify 15 participants, 3 different internal groups, maybe like sales, marketing, and I don't know if there's maybe support or tech writers or something like that. I don't know that product would be the best one to score our product. I think maybe we should filter them out for this research. But yeah, so we can identify those people. We don't need to spend the time on the call doing that, but I think that'll be the next step, and we should get moving on that now that it's available everywhere.
Is the editor, I don't know, is it in the docs site yet, or is it only the handbook?
It's not in
docs?
We don't technically support Nanoc, which is what the docs site uses to generate the HTML. It has been adapted to work with Nanoc, actually by a community member, not a GitLab team member. We could look into that, but it's not actually on our immediate roadmap.
Because if that's the case, then yeah, it seems like tech writers would be less, I guess, lower on the list of groups than someone who is working on the handbook a lot. Yeah, so I just wanted to think about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, we can discuss it in the issue. I think there might be 2 different groups in marketing or 2 different groups in sales. You know, like those are fairly large organizations. We can narrow it down a little more to help source.
Yeah, off the top of my head, honestly, I think product marketing and content marketing, I'm not sure if it's content, if that is how it's broken down. Those seem like 2 good groups.
Yeah, sounds good.
But then also maybe people, not in leadership, but I know, for example, Sid works with quite a few people who handle a lot of MRs.
Mhm.
and things related to maybe action items from leadership meetings or things like that. Like, for example, Emily Sherrio in the internal strategy consultant role. I know she's moving on soon, but that is also, it's not a one uniform group, but that's also another group of people I think of.
Yeah, and we have worked with Emily on some research before. She she weren't moving on, which we're very excited for her, for the record, but we would probably consider, but maybe she can find some others that she works with or do similar work. That's a good call.
Question, what's the best way to reach out to these people? Slack directly, or ping them directly, or using channels like last time?
Usually when
Because this
you
is
have
like,
someone in mind, I would definitely suggest reaching out to them directly. But if it's something
okay.
like we want volunteers from the product marketing team, and you can just post in the Slack channel and
Okay.
have people volunteer or
Cool.
sign up.
All right, cool. Thanks for clearing that up.
The only other thing while I had you in person, Michael, was I wanted to talk through if you have had any further thoughts on sort of the future format of the editor. The reason this has come up is as we've sort of kicked off the technical requirements exploration for whether or not we should be sticking with Toast UI. I have been talking with Jean about how we kind of need to commit to some loose direction for whether we're moving towards something more like an open text area or individual text areas like a traditional CMS, or a more flexible block editor that has sort of like every paragraph is its own block of content. And I've given this a lot of thought over the past few weeks. I need to document this, but for the purposes of the discussion, if we were to say we're going to commit to having a really, really well done, best in class block editor, what does that look like? Who else is doing it well that we can draw inspiration from? What risks might we be exposing ourselves to as far as the user experience goes, or limitations that we might run into? The only things I can think of are very long form content, like handbook pages. That's a lot of blocks. It might be a performance hit, and it might be just difficult to manage, like if I wanted to select multiple paragraphs or select the whole page. I would want to make sure that whatever solution we have, selection across blocks is really solid. I can imagine trying to copy between multiple paragraphs and it spans multiple blocks, and how we handle that would probably be very important to define. Personally, I think Notion does this very well in their editor. Now, obviously, it is web-based, but it's not a web editor. It's its own thing. But we've looked into that before, and you've recorded video walkthroughs, and I think that it's a very, very well done editor. I think Ghost, which I haven't played with in person, but I've seen screenshots of and little animated GIFs of, I think those are those make me feel like they have something pretty special there. And the reason I am drawn to the block editor is mostly because I want to unlock some functionality down the road. It seems easier for me to wrap my head around things like partials, like including content from partials or includes, extending the editor with custom content types. So allowing a front-end engineer for their project to say, I'm going to create a gallery content block, and then you provide any number of images and it'll do a slideshow gallery, right? We don't have to write that, but somebody could write a widget, for lack of a better word, that gets inserted into a page. And I think this is, and I'll wrap up with this thought, this is where we would start to toe into the page builder territory, because you could have these a little bit more elaborate content blocks that could be inserted into the page. And that makes me nervous, because I don't think our near-term mission should be to enable like template building and page building and like layout of landing pages. But I do think that there's a very strong use case for guided content, you know, rearranging. It's hard to describe, but like having it on Rails a little bit and giving the options to the front end engineer to configure the editor however flexible they want it. So being able to say, you know what, I'm going to only offer these 5 content block types in my editor. Like that could be something pretty interesting. So I'll turn it over. Just some thoughts.
Okay. I'm just going to go here, and I saw Catherine put down a question saying, is this related to a research issue around issue 921, which is looking at like other areas of the handbook editing? And then the one I put down to 923 is about like the editing experience itself. So 923 was looking at like what kind of editing experience do we want to have? Do we want to have the block editor? Do we want like the fields where you type in on the like sidebar and then it populates into the center, or do we want side by side, or you know, like that editing experience? Like what's that right feel for that? That was what 923 is about. 921 is an interesting one because it's like looking at where else could we use static site editing within GitLab's product. For example, you know, when you're writing issues and stuff like that, like is that, you know, that editor there should that be the static site editor component? You know, that's like an editing block itself, or you know, are we looking at other use cases beyond the handbook and like, you know, do we integrate with other things? So I think what we need to do is frame what we're trying to solve before we like double down on block editor is one of them, and I think it's probably like the one that we're going to go with at the end. But yeah, I think this will be answered once we get a good feel of how we want to edit with the use cases that we deal with at GitLab, and then looking beyond our internal and looking at the external purposes of it. So, you know, bringing it on pages is an interesting one. I know that's been brought up separately, but you know, how does that differ from the static site editing experience? And could we make that easier for people to spin up pages using the static site editor? Yeah, I don't think it really answers the future of the editor. I think these 2 research issues probably will help define it better, and maybe the Think Big session that we've been talking about for a while might also align with that. So maybe those 3 somehow in combination will help articulate the future of the editor. Because I think we're in this like funny spot in the middle now that it's in the handbook. You know, when I first joined the team, that was kind of the mandate. And it's like, you know, we want to make it easier for people to contribute to the handbook. Cool. We're getting there, and then we have a good path towards that. But beyond the handbook is you're kind of looking at that as well. And I think this is that fuzzy ground that's like fun in product, where you get to discover and do more problem validation and things like that. I think we just need to get on this and prioritize, maybe have a separate call for talking about this in detail. I think that would be useful for discussing in detail outside this call.
Yeah, completely agree. And as I mentioned last time, and I didn't get a lot further on the jobs to be done last week, just for I had other things on my plate, but nailing those down, and that's kind of where I've come closer to an opinion. Let's not say a decision, but an opinion, a stance on whether or not we should be investigating a block editor. And it's mostly around those jobs to be done that aren't as frequently needed in the handbook, but are when you start thinking about it as a product that everybody can use on multiple static site generators, and potentially for any number of different types of sites, documentations, or sites, or blogs, or any marketing or landing page kind of site. And the reason, I guess, to distill it down, the reason I think that it's an interesting direction is for flexibility. And I think as soon as we start having the ability to create new pages, people are going to need to be able to craft those pages in a way that would feel very limited if we stuck with the current implementation of the static site editor. So that's my hypothesis right now. We can take it offline and continue to define those, but the next round of jobs to be done that we're solving, those are definitely, or that we might want to solve, those are definitely what's leading me towards that direction.
Yep, and that makes sense.
Yeah, so I thought you brought up good points. So from reading the category direction page, it seemed like there's a lot of the thought about where it might go, but what I see less of is, I guess, the primary targets. So I know currently internal users are the primary target users kind of by default, but where I'm not sure is beyond that, who will be the next kind of like core groups, because there's kind of a lot of possibilities, UX writers, tech writers, copywriters, PMs, leaderships, and whatnot. So I think kind of honing in on who you think the static site editor can serve the most. It's almost like a hypothesis about who you think it can serve the most and what use cases they would have, and then kind of understanding how they can accomplish that within like the context of GitLab. I think that's how I tend to think about it. So I think in this case, there's probably more hypothesizing, but then you can use research to say test and understand whether the people you think would be the target users, whether they would even need this type of feature for their workflow. You can you can do a prototype that tests out certain flows and see if it's usable. So I think there will probably be more hypotheses up front, and then research can kind of test those hypotheses.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's one of the challenges too, is because we're trying to be fairly accessible to all users, so it's hard to pick just one, right? What we do know is that when talking to front-end engineers or maintainers of projects or maintainers of sites, they usually just refer to these people as contributors or collaborators or writers, right? So they might be marketing content marketing, writers. They might be stakeholders in a small, like an agency or something like that. They could be the clients themselves, for small projects. If I had to pick one or two, though, I think it's going to be, well, it's going to be hard. But yeah, we gotta pick a focus and try and pin down, as we've talked about, personas for external contributors.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. And I think I saw a similar problem with design management, because it was such, like a new area, and in this case, a new set of users entirely. But what I think we tried to think about is how we would be bringing people over to the editors. So are we saying this is a product offering that will bring in entirely new users, like people who are totally unrelated to GitLab and they'd be interested in this and they could use it in some way? Or is it kind of like a bridge between a team? Like say you already have developers on GitLab and now you want designers on that team to start using GitLab. So you start talking to customers who have expressed pain points related to this feature set or something like that. I think it's challenging with even more challenging with just like the editor situation, but that's another way to think about it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think I'll probably ask a little bit more about your experience with the design management because I do think there's a lot of parallels. I think the goal here is pretty clearly to be the bridge into newer personas that are already part of a team that might already be using GitLab. We're not necessarily building this right now in a way that's going to attract new customers in mass quantities. There might be some that hear about it and are like, well, switch from another product to this, or, I read some kind of tutorial online and it tells me that I should just go to GitLab to do this all in one place. That would be great. But I think, at least at first, it's going to be like, okay, now I have this, and now I don't need to host my internal site on our server or on like a SaaS product that's separate. I can bring it into GitLab, and now I can invite my tech writers, or I can invite my content marketing writers, and then they get a seat on GitLab and they can start working.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next point because I feel like once again I dominated the whole half hour.
No, that's all right. I think it's all related, and there's that blurry line between design and product and research. So it's a happy space for all of us. Yeah, my thing was just like editing on front matter. So Adrian got the license for the tool for what we're going to try to use for the unmoderated testing. And I'm going to start trying to recruit people directly for that. The way I'm kind of targeting people is people who made edits to the handbook related to front matter, excluding people from our team. So I'm going to crack on with that today. Then
Yeah, that sounds great. That's a good way to filter it. We don't do a ton on the handbook with front matter, so that should narrow it down to a pretty small pool, but those would be the people we'd really want to please. I think the only other thing I would say is like maybe further research or further validation down the road, we might try and test with people who have never edited front matter or don't even know what front matter is, but want to just like change the title of a page. This might be better suited though for research and validation when we start creating a new page or extend beyond the handbook, because they might have a few more, maybe external users might have more elaborate front matter that they manage a little more carefully. Like we'd really only have 2 or 3 fields.
So we have 2 or 3 fields in the handbook, but yeah, marketing pages have a lot more.
Is a lot, yeah. But the static site editor doesn't work on the marketing pages, so we'd have to fake it a little bit, or we can prototype it out as if they worked. But the marketing site isn't going to have a static site editor. I'm just trying to think how that would, what kind of, if that would have any challenges. I mean, I think it'd be fine. These are the people that are more familiar with front matter, so they'll probably be good to weigh in. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Good to know. Yeah, that's pretty much from my side. So I guess with category maturity scorecard, I'll start reaching out to people, and then same thing with editing front matter.
Cool.
Cool.
That sounds great. And I will get working on those jobs to be done, and hopefully have a successful group conversation tomorrow. And I'll be working on just sort of backlog refinement and stuff over the next week on both the handbook and static site editor projects. So hopefully get some of these issues and some of these things a little more clearly defined for the next few releases. So we can kind of get ahead of things.
Mm-hmm. Do we need to schedule like a sync call for the jobs to be done, or talking about the research in more detail?
Yeah, let me look at the calendar and put something either late this week or early next week, or maybe we can just use this time next week to chat about it in more detail, and that'll just give me a deadline. I'll try and get them worked out. And then I will be scheduling the journey mapping, think big brainstorming session finally this week.
Okay,
I don't know
cool.
if it will be this week, but I mean, I will be creating the event this week.
Okay, well, let's say next week we'll chat about this. Sounds good.
Cool. Sounds good. All right, well, I will stop the recording. Thanks, everyone.
All right.